The issues and challenges facing Detroit and Southeast Michigan travel north up I-75 for the annual policy conference. From political talk in a key election year to pleas for putting the mental health crisis front and center. Today is Sunday, June 2nd, 2024. For Mackinac Island, this is Flashpoint.
Good morning and welcome to the beautiful Grand Hotel here on Mackinac Island, the site of the annual policy conference thrown by the Detroit Regional Chamber. We've got an awful lot to get to this morning. I want to start, though, with my conversation with Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and we talked about the things that do and don't work that come out of this policy conference.
Governor, good to see you again on this. It's been a beautiful week up here. Fantastic.
It has been.
I'd like us to focus mostly on the issues that circulate, not just this year, but around this conference, this year and years past. Let's start with the housing initiative that you just announced yesterday to try to solve the housing crisis.
Well, you know, there's a housing crisis nationally. So we know here in Michigan, we need more affordable housing in all places, from Traverse City to the most rural parts of Michigan to downtown Detroit. And so we set a pretty audacious goal of 75,000 units by the end of 2026. We're going to hit that goal next year. We're ahead of schedule. And so with dollars that we have from the Biden-Harris administration through the IRA, we decided let's get even more aggressive. So the new goal is 115,000 units. And we're going to hit that goal. We're making great progress.
For those that want to see the market itself run the housing market rather than government, interference, if you want to call it, or assistance, it's really hard if you're talking about, by definition, it's hard to let low-income housing work at the market level, right?
Right. I mean, the cost of rent, we know, eats up most people's budgets. And so we've got a lot of people who are unhoused or who are in housing that is not up to code or is not efficient. And so they actually spend even more of their pay on their housing. And so this is good for our economy. We got a lot of jobs available, but we got to be able to give employees good places to live.
Last year at this conference, you announced this a chief growth officer. Hillary's had about a year now in that position. It remains, I know, your obsession, what you do about trying to grow Michigan's population, but talk to me about the year since making that announcement.
Yeah, well, I'm really proud of the work that we've done. I think that, this new census number out of the city of Detroit is very encouraging. I'm not going to imply it's all happened in the last year. It didn't. But right. I think as we think about making sure that Michigan's a place that people want to move to, whether it's housing, whether it is the cost of living, whether it is job opportunities, all of these things are really important to our goal, and as is transit. And so there's a lot of work in the state budget that I think we're on the cusp of achieving as you think about the Growing Michigan Together Council recommendations. So we're chipping away at it. We didn't get in this position overnight. We don't fix it overnight, but we're making real progress.
Dan Gilbert talked about transit is absolutely necessary if we're going to attract young people.
Yep.
It's not lost on any of us who've been coming to this conference for many years that transit has been talked about like that forever, and we really never seem to take many steps forward.
Well, what we have seen out of the legislature, even in the last week, is a genuine, I think, plan to make a big investment in transit. We have to build that out. And so we know in Southeast Michigan that this is something that creates job opportunity for people. It improves quality of life. It decreases congestion. It's good for climate. I mean, there are so many upsides to doing this. And so I really think that there's a genuine substantive conversation in Lansing that's getting started for the first time in a long time. 5
years ago, we were on the west end of the porch, that big, one of the few times that we've seen that sort of bipartisan come together to sign no-fault reform. Since then, we went from being the most expensive car insurance in the country to, I believe, we are only the second most expensive car insurance in the country. We also have this huge pool of people who were left without care, which I don't think anybody thought they were taking care away from anybody when you signed that into law.
Yeah.
But talk about what we have to do now, because I can't imagine it's been what you intended.
No, I mean, I was hopeful that we would see rates drop, in a greater way. I was hopeful that with, options that we would see more consumer benefit. And so I do think that there's more work to do in this space. It was a different time. I think that we did make some progress, but not enough, in my opinion. And so I been trying to get the legislature to have that conversation under the last legislature. I know that there are a lot of folks interested in this current legislature, and those conversations are happening. What more can we do to give people relief? Lastly,
yesterday, Mayor Duggan's session was titled Michigan's Biggest Crisis, I believe, and nobody was exactly certain what he was going to talk about. It was all about mental health. Mm-hmm. Does that ring true to you?
I think it's very true. You know, I know that the mayor highlighted this in the 90s. John Engler really eviscerated our mental health system. And, you know, the Lafayette Clinic, the mayor specifically talked about yesterday in Detroit, closed down. People were put out on the streets. We do in this country we do not do enough around mental health. I'm proud that with this current legislature, we finally got mental health parity to my desk. I just signed it in the last couple of weeks. We've been working on that for decades. I'm a migraine sufferer. I've got family members who suffer from depression. Guess what? It's all brain chemistry, but my ailment has always been considered a legitimate healthcare expense where my loved ones hasn't been. That's not going to be the case anymore. And I think we're going to finally make some strides when it comes to addressing mental health. The investment we've made in our schools for our kids' mental health. I mean, we have made progress, but as the mayor pointed out, rightly so, there's still a lot more work to do here.
Of course, politics always play a big part of the conversations here at the conference every year, much less a critical election year like 2024. And that made it a very timely visit from the political director for NBC News, Chuck Todd. He and I sat down for a conversation on the main stage the other day.
Well, I want to get to Michigan's primacy in this election. I think you are among the many people who believe that whoever does win the White House in November is certainly going to have to win Michigan.
I literally go back and forth. My friend Amy Walter said, all right, you're in a coma for the next 6 months. You wake up on the day after the election, and you only get
so lucky to be in a coma.
I know. I keep asking for that. Normally, his job is to set me up. Sorry. But look at that. I set you up right there on the tee. And you only get one state's results to find out who won, right? And I vacillate between Wisconsin and Michigan. You know, literally, I do this, right? And, you know, right now I would say Michigan. I think you throw in the Gaza aspect. But to me, Madison is sort of got the same, you know, Ralph Nader carried precincts in Madison in 2000. Let me repeat. Ralph Nader carried precincts in Madison, Wisconsin. Okay, so the likelihood that there could be a progressive left protest vote against Biden in Madison is, to me, as likely as it could be in Dearborn. Okay. So in that way, there is some mirror image issues there. But I think it does feel as if Michigan's a bit more volatile. In a weird way, Wisconsin is stable in its polarization. Michigan there is a volatility here to what is turnout going to look like. You've got a divided Republican Party that's kind of been arguably held them back, right? And then you have what's happening in Dearborn. So I think it's a very volatile state.
And you can find my entire lengthy conversation with Chuck Todd right now on clickondetroit.com and Local 4 Plus. All right, we've got a lot more to get to this morning, but we're going to intersperse a couple of thoughts from some of Michigan's statewide leaders. I talked to a number of people, asking them about the one thing that's on their mind this week.
Well, we're now finalizing some of our rules on artificial intelligence and how the federal government purchases artificial intelligence systems. You know, there are tremendous opportunities, but a lot of challenges associated with that technology as well. So we're going to introduce probably the first comprehensive legislation dealing with procurement. We think it'll be a game changer, not just for the federal government, but the economy at large.
Do you find yourself more fearful or more excited or in equal measure about AI?
I think you have to look at it equal measure because it is powerful, but anything that's powerful can also have nefarious purposes or uses depending on who's using it. And we have to really be wide-eyed and open-minded about it.
For me, this conference has been about how we can make it very clear that supporting entrepreneurship, making more high-growth companies a reality here in Michigan, that is key to our economic development future. And so every word out of my mouth this week has been about how we can support those kind of entrepreneurs, how we can bring more capital and resources, but also how we can bring more like literal infrastructure. Like we just did this announcement for Project Diamond. It's this huge network of of 3D printers. It's going to be available in Wayne, Oakland, Macomb County to the start, thanks to funding from the Biden-Harris administration, where people can print things at small scale and then put them together at large scale. This is like the modern version of the arsenal for democracy in terms of just if a person has an idea, whether it's for like a little widget or for an entire vehicle, they can start that process with this network of 3D printers. And I can't wait to see what people invent. It makes the accessibility of entrepreneurship and the manufacturing space in particular lower than it's ever been in the history of the state of Michigan. It's going to be a big deal.
I know it was last year's theme, but growing our population is what I'm focused on a lot. And what I'm hearing this year at this conference is some of the details. How do we do that? Let's start to put some of these pieces in place. Transit is a big one. There's a bill in Lansing right now that would significantly fund transit at a level that we've never done. I think we ought to do that. That's just one way that we can grow our population. But I'm still thinking about the fact that we're losing ground to other states and other regions, and we got to change that.
My biggest thing is, and it's something that talks about a lot, but we aren't really talking about much up here, is the mental health challenges that we're facing, throughout this country, not just in Southeast Michigan, Macomb County. And how are we going to address that? I think each and every one of us has an opportunity to have an impact on it. In Macomb County, our impact is with this new focus with our new jail project. It isn't just a jail. It's a jail that has a mindful approach towards mental health. We're going to be able to house people in there and making sure that we have the right facilities, but more importantly, the processing of people that come in contact with law enforcement 24/7, 365. They're going to be coming into a facility where they're going to be looked at, and there's going to be a determination made by experts as to what is the real challenges these people face. So we're finally able to do something internally and even with community-based support.
Mark Hackle's thoughts lead us perfectly into my next conversation. One of the sessions this week was entitled Michigan's Greatest Challenge. It was hosted by Mayor Duggan. None of us really knew what he meant by Michigan's Greatest Challenge, but it became pretty evident quickly that he felt that greatest challenge right now is our mental health crisis. And his conversation to frame that was with Detroit's police chief, James White.
Chief, I really appreciate your time. Yesterday's session with the mayor was titled Michigan's Greatest Challenge, and nobody quite knew exactly what he was going to talk about. Mm-hmm. And then it turned out to be mental health. I imagine you're on the same page that that's our biggest challenge at the moment?
It really is our biggest challenge, and certainly in policing. This is something that impacts everybody, all socioeconomic backgrounds, all demographics. Mental health is a crisis right now in this country and certainly in our city.
A lot of people go back to, a lot of changes that Governor Engler made, but I think it's also fair to say that our health crisis challenges then seem to be more intense than they are now, seem to be more intense than they have been in a long, long time.
I think so. I mean, what happened with Lafayette Clinic was in 1996. Mm-hmm. And, as unfortunate as that was, we're talking 29 years ago, and it's time now to come up with some solutions, well overdue. We're seeing now people making decisions that are costing them their lives, costing others their lives as a result of their mental health crisis that's been unaddressed.
Every time we cover a crime story, it so often feels that there's a mental health issue somewhere at the heart of it. Of the people who are in your jail right now, what percentage do you suppose are really dealing with mental health issues rather than just sort of whatever you want to call it, everyday criminality?
That's a great question, and we look at it, we explore it, and we know that statistically it's about 30% of reported mental health issues, whether it be they've been treated in the past or they're currently being treated. But then there's the number that we don't know, the numbers that are unaddressed, the numbers that we see where people have not been treated or they haven't gone to the hospital and gotten a diagnosis. But we know that when someone's reacting the way that they're reacting to road rage, or they're barricaded because of a very a simple argument or breakup, you can argue that those cases too have a mental health nexus because of the reasoning and the decision making.
We've talked so much about trying to destigmatize mental health issues so that people can talk about them more, which is the first step toward getting help to it. Are we there, or do you still feel like there is a huge difference between the way we treat a physical ailment versus a mental one?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, and I say this all the time. I hope we get to the point where we're treating mental health like we treat a trip to the dentist office. Go 6 months, get a cleaning, come back in 6 months if there's no problems, right? I would love to see mental health checkups. I would love to see that people are taking their mental health seriously. We know that anxiety is the #1 mental health disorder that goes untreated and undiagnosed. Then there's depression, and then there's bipolar disorder. And unfortunately with mental health, it's the only medical ailment that gets addressed at failure, meaning you get a headache, you take a pill, you get a sniffle, you take some cold medicine, but when you wake up depressed, you get over it. And then when it compounds and you end up having a break is when you seek the treatment. And that's unfortunate because that could cost lives.
Something you and I have talked about on Flashpoint before, too, is that right now our mental health system, unfortunately, is you and your officers often are the first line. You show up at a house and that's what's going on. You have a master's in mental health counseling. Mm-hmm. Most of your officers don't. This is a real burden to place on the guys working the street every day.
Yeah. Mental health in policing now, but I always say that nothing good came from COVID. Nothing. But what COVID did show us that we can't unsee is how the impact of that social isolation, that inability to connect with people for that period of time has impacted policing and mental health. It shows us that a lot of people were in mental health crisis. It shows us things that we can't unsee. We now can't not see the impact of mental health in our communities. Policing, I joined to be a police officer, answer police runs, write tickets, and wanted to ride a motorcycle at the time. But you couldn't tell me 28 years into this business that we would be the primary mental health servicer in our communities.
There's no getting around the fact that this is money. This is going to cost a lot of money to fix.
It is, but I would venture to say this. If you fix mental health, I think you're going to, you'll never eliminate crime, but you'll reduce it. You'll reduce drug use. We've declared a war on drugs, didn't work. We've declared all these different activities towards this thing, X, just fill in the blank. But if you really address the mental health crisis, we know that when you see people engaged in road rage, you see people drinking and driving, you see people drinking too much, you see people using illegal drugs. All of those, not all, but a majority of those, I would argue, have a mental health nexus. I would also argue that, if people are self-medicating because they're trying to suppress whatever emotions that they're going through, and then that's leading them to poor decision-making because of some level of intoxication, you treat mental health, you have an opportunity to impact all of those categories across the board. So I'd like to try it. I'd like to put that money into those long-term treatment facilities, those doctors, those counselors, and maybe you reduce incarceration. Maybe you reduce instances where people are being locked up, and then you can move that money over to support mental health. I am convinced it could work.
I wonder all of the time as we do news stories about horrible crimes, horrible events in communities, how much of it really does trace back to mental health. It seems like the majority of it. We've got more to come. We're going to take a quick break, but here's more of what's on your mind.
Well, I think the next big thing for our state and really for the country is to invest in housing. It's becoming a crisis. It's affecting our ability to grow the economy in areas where we're seeing a renaissance in manufacturing. We can't get the workforce. We can't get the workforce because it's too expensive for people to live in the places where the jobs potentially could grow. So I'm hoping that this conversation over the next couple of days results in a really significant focus on that.
You got to be happy to see it. It's on the agenda, right?
It is on the agenda. I just listened to a discussion on it, but I think we really need to push this both at the state level, but also at the federal level. I hope that the presidential election will at least in part address this issue.
Well, this week is the opportunity, seriously, for everybody to come and listen to each other and try to figure out how to work together. And I really am interested in making as many connections, not just with me, but people with each other. We have a lot of listening.
Can we do that?
Understanding. Yes, I mean, we need to do that, right? Big issues. There are people that just, I swear that their full-time job is trying to tear us apart and have us not understand each other. And so a beautiful place. wonderful people who mean well. They love this state. They love Metro Detroit. And we just have to stop and be able to listen and find that one thing that we can come together on.
Democracy, respecting each other, listening to each other. I really fear that people are trying to divide us with hate, and that we all have to take a deep breath and remember that we have different life experiences. We can help each other when we work together. United we stand, divided we fall.
Well, right now, legislation that I have that we thought was moving for child security on the internet, it has slowed down for political reasons. We're hoping by the end of next week we can get it back on the docket, get it across the line over the Senate.
Welcome back. Let's go 3 and out here with 3 things that I found to be really fascinating this past week. Of course, first, we learned this past week through the Detroit News reporting that the scandal, the alleged theft at the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, far larger than any of us could have imagined. Perhaps up to $40 million missing. Extraordinary. The FBI investigation goes on. Secondly, there's a lot of talk about the Renaissance Center, with General Motors now moving to the new Hudson site. What's going to happen to the RenCen? We didn't get much clarity on that at all this week. Mary Barra last week didn't say it was going to be torn down, but she also didn't say it wouldn't be. Mayor Duggan says he has faith that the right people are working on the problem. Dan Gilbert said that right now it's in the brainstorming stage. So what's going to happen to one of the signature pieces of the Detroit skyline? Lastly, something called Project Diamond. Wayne County now joining Oakland and Macomb counties in this massive network of 3D printers. This is a really extraordinary thing where not only it's going to be big news for small businesses that want to print parts and goods, but even somebody just working out of their basement can be a part of this massive connected network of 3D printers. Trust me, you're going to keep hearing a lot more about that. Before we go, we do need to make a correction from last week's program. On last Sunday morning's Flashpoint, Nolan Finley said that City Councilwoman Mary Waters had served time in prison. She's, of course, now running for Congress. That was in error. She has not been to prison, and both Nolan Finley and Local 4 regret that error. That's going to do it for us. We have no program next week because you'll be seeing the French Open on Local 4, but we'll be right back with you the week after that for much more for Flashpoint.